The contents of this video were presented in the book Collaboration, Engagement, and Tradition in Contemporary and Electronic Music, Noise Floor Perspectives, edited by Mark Estabiro, Dave Paling, and David Cotter, published by Routledge. The publisher even put the recorded examples on their website. However, this fact was not in the book itself, and I fear that most readers will not find them. Since they are integral to the understanding of the material, I have decided to create this video so that people will be able to hear the examples and the composition in context. The fact that a collection of harmonically related frequencies is perceived as a single tone is a rich source for musical invention. This video shows how individual overtones can be used as compositional elements. I will discuss timbre in musical instruments, spectra, how the fundamental arises from a collection of individually introduced overtones, hearing overtones as well as fundamentals in musical contexts, and examples of different musical effects that can be achieved using these ideas. How can we hear individual overtones in music, and what could we do with them? Overtones are not usually heard separately, but only as part of the timbre or tone color of a sound. Special methods must be employed to enable us to hear them. Spectrum is only one aspect of a sound's timbre. I'll consider how musical intervals relate to the overtone series and how we can hear individual overtones as separate notes, leading to the idea that a single tone can embody both melody and harmony. Musical scores specify notes that are to be played by different instruments, and for the most part, there is no exact specification of what those sounds should be. The term timbre is defined as the properties that enable a listener to identify the instrument being played. Musical instruments are classified according to the mechanisms that produce their tones. The main categories are stringed instruments, which produce sound by drawing a bow across or plucking a string; woodwinds, which produce the sound by blowing a reed attached to a mouthpiece or simply blowing across the mouthpiece; brasses, in which a different kind of mouthpiece connected to the body is blown into; percussion, where drums or other objects are struck with some kind of mallet; and keyboard instruments, which enable multiple tones to be played by a keyboard attached to a sounding mechanism that can produce tones in different ways. These considerations alone show that timbre is a multifaceted concept. There is always some amount of noise or extraneous sound produced by the process of playing the instrument, especially during the attack or onset of the tone. This can be wind escaping from the sides of the mouthpiece, key clicks, bow scratches, and other non-musical properties. The sounding mechanisms that produce musical tones, namely the strings, mouthpieces, or metal objects that are struck, usually produce harmonic vibrations, meaning that they produce a series of frequencies that are integral multiples of the fundamental. Each of these individual frequencies are sine waves, and Fourier analysis breaks the sound down into separate frequencies that vary in time. The only musical instrument that comes close to producing a sine wave is the flute, and most flute tones have a more complex spectrum. However, listening to the flute alone will give you some idea of what a sine tone sounds like. In musical instruments, the sounding body is attached to an object that resonates these frequencies, and the most important aspects of the body are their length and shape. Stringed instruments have complex shapes, with the strings placed strategically near openings in the body, which has a definite volume. Brass instruments are conical in shape, constantly expanding from the mouthpiece, and the length can be many feet in some cases. Oboes, bassoons, and saxophones are also conical, but clarinets and flutes are cylindrical. Instrumental timbre is a result of the frequencies produced by the string or mouthpiece and the resonances produced by the instrument, which amplify some of them and reduce the level of others. The resonances of most instruments include formants, specific frequency areas that are most prominent. For members of the clarinet family, the cylindrical shape resonates only odd-numbered partials. The subject of the acoustics of musical instruments is a fascinating topic, but not the topic of this video. These points are mentioned to explain how we form our ideas about musical timbre from our experience with instrumental music. Human speech consists of consonants, which are of very short duration, and vowels, which are long. The human voice also produces different timbres depending upon how the mouth shapes the sounds to produce different vowels. Vowels also have formants, much like musical instruments, and these have been studied extensively over the past several decades to the point where we can now produce speech synthetically. In common language, many people mean spectrum when they use the term timbre, but, as we have just explained, There is actually an important difference between these terms. In the present discussion, we will be concerned only with the spectrum of sounds and not the bushel basket of properties that make up the complete definition of musical timbre. Most sounds that we hear in music are not the single tones that we hear as pitches, but consist of many different tones that merge into a single entity. Those different tones constitute the spectrum of the sound, something that is usually perceived as the tone quality or timbre. We can't really speak of structuring them in instrumental or vocal music. Electroacoustic music is the first music that allows such a possibility. Musical harmony books usually illustrate the overtone series in a chart like Figure 1, which shows the closest pitches to the first 16 partials of C2. To be sure, these overtones are not exactly the same as their tempered pitches. In order to clarify the extent to which they are out of tune, I need to explain the octave point pitch class system, or 8VE point PC, method of notating pitches, which is used in C sound and other music synthesis programs. The pitch of middle C is near the frequency of 2 to the 8th, or 256 Hz, and the frequencies of the tempered scale can be generated by raising 2 to the power of the octave plus n divided by 12, where n is the semitone above C that you want. The result is then multiplied by 1.0219749, bringing the A above middle C to 440 Hz, which is the international standard. Some European countries use a slightly higher frequency, such as 444 Hz. In 8VE point PC, the integer portion represents the octave, with 8 as middle C, and the first two digits represent the pitch class, with 0.00 as C going up to 0.11 as B. Going higher than 0.11 puts you in the next octave. The third and fourth digits represent cents, or hundredths of a semitone. A440 would be 8.09, C above middle C would be 9.00, and the value 8.12 would also work. The lowest note on the piano would be 4.09, and the highest note 12.00. Fractions of semitones are possible, such that 8.005 would denote a quarter tone between C and C sharp. The main difference between 8VE point PC and the usual notation is that the octaves are numbered 4 higher, but this has the advantage that it provides a notation for subsonic and supersonic frequencies. This notation also works for intervals, where 1.00 would represent an octave and 2.07 would mean 2 octaves in the fifth. In considering the pitches of overtones above the fundamental, Table 1 shows in 8VE point PC form the interval above the fundamental in equal temperament for the first 32 harmonic partials, spanning 5 octaves above the fundamental. Partials above the 32nd certainly exist, but they are very close together, and their pitches cannot be perceived independently unless isolated from their immediate neighbors or amplified. Also, when we consider the timbres of musical instruments, very seldom are partials this high taken into account, although they exist, and sometimes they can go higher than human hearing, in which case other interesting things may happen. Table 2 summarizes the relationship between overtones and tempered pitches. As tables 1 and 2 show, the perfect fifths and minor thirds are both within 2% of their corresponding tempered intervals. Next are the major second, 4% sharp, the minor second, 5% sharp, and major sixth, 6% sharp. These are very close, less than 1/10 of a semitone apart. Next is the major seventh, 12% flat, and the major third, 14% flat. These are still quite close, and we have no problem identifying these as their corresponding tempered pitches. As we move away from these intervals, the partials get further and further away. The 21st partial is 29% flat from the perfect fourth, and the minor seventh is 31% flat. The tritone and minor sixth are the furthest away. There are two choices for the tritones, the 11th and 22nd being 49% flat, and the 23rd 8% sharp, respectively, and the two choices for the minor sixth are similar, the 13th and 26th being 41% sharp, and the 25th being 27% flat. Before we worry too much about these issues, it is important to discuss the issues of intonation deviation in performed music and the history of tuning and temperament, which present similar problems. Tuning was a significant issue before the discovery of logarithms, which are the basis of equal temperament. This is no longer of much interest because we regard tuning as having been solved by equal temperament. There are good books on this subject, for example, J. Murray Barber's Tuning and Temperament, a Historical Survey. Originally written in 1932, this book is now available from Dover Books. As we can see from Table 2, the third partial is very close to the perfect fifth, and in medieval and Renaissance times people tried to create scales using the circle of fifths. The trouble was that, depending upon whether you went up or down, by the time you got G sharp going up or A flat going down, the difference was very perceptible, and early keyboard makers created separate keys for these notes. The tritone was also significantly out of tune with medieval instruments, and the interval was referred to as the devil in music. Music played on period instruments tuned by historical methods often sounds out of tune to our ears. But most medieval and Renaissance music was vocal, where singers were tuned by ear, so they avoided this issue. If we consider the performance of a cappella choral music in the 21st century, which is sung without instrumental accompaniment, singers are often just given the first note of the piece, after which they're on their own. The fact that singers still manage to sing the music, even though it might be out of tune if the pitches were measured, means that people have a rather intuitive idea of the tempered scale, even if they do not know the mathematics behind it. There is an interesting aspect of brass instruments in relation to the Overtone series. The valves, or slider in the case of the trombone, change the length of the metal tube that produces the note, and thus changes the fundamental frequency of the tune. By changing pressure at the mouthpiece, the player is able to play different overtones of the fundamental, thus generating different notes. The important fact here is that these are overtones, and the only way that they can be tuned is by ear. Another important point is that just intonation is a system of tuning based on using whole number ratios to tune intervals. This practice is very similar to using overtones, but it is not the same. Personally, I've always been skeptical of music in just intonation performed by musical instruments. The only true justly tuned music would have to be produced by computers or possibly electronic instruments. Keyboard instruments play fixed pitches without the possibility of any deviations in performance, but in this case the picture is also quite a mess. Historically, pianos are tuned by a rather complicated method of tuning one note with a tuning fork, usually A440, and then another on the basis of beats from the original note, although some modern tuners use instruments to do it. The result, however, is a stretched spectrum of sound in which notes at the high end are a bit somewhat sharp and at the low end somewhat flat. An out-of-tune piano is sometimes desired, where this approach is used to create a honky-tonk piano. Organs are tuned by a variety of historical methods, reflecting the fact that much organ music was composed before equal temperament. Werkmeister, for example, was active during the lifetime of J.S. Bach. Other methods include Kirnberger, mean tone, and Velotti temperaments, and there are many others. The point here is that none of these represent pure equal temperament. The subject of intonation deviations in performed music is one that has not garnered much interest, although there are a few papers that even mention it. In almost all performed music, the instrumentalists and vocalists tune their intervals by ear, and it is doubtful that the sounds formed are actually equally tempered. Another difficulty in assessing this is that vibrato, intentionally varying the pitch for expressive effect, also makes it difficult to measure the tuning. The point here is that performed notes may often be significantly out of tune, which would ease our anxiety about accepting these partials as representations of other notes. One conclusion of these deliberations is that performed music is usually heard as being in tune, but it is doubtful that it is a truly equal temperament. A significant aspect of tempered intervals is that they are a bit out of tune with the harmonics of notes in a musical context, and a result of these deviations is beating, tremolo, or amplitude modulation. It is a fact of our perception of sound that the harmonic partials of a tone fuse into a single pitch and are perceived as the tone color of the sound. I have used the term spectral merging to describe this process. Spectral merging is likely to be a factor only when individual overtones are being employed. Two questions that need to be explored are: 1. How many overtones are necessary to make the fundamental be perceived? And 2. What relationship between them is required? Milton Babbitt, who had experience with this issue when working with the RCA synthesizer, which allowed frequencies to be turned on or off in oscillator banks, told me that you needed at least 3 consecutive partials to obtain the fundamental. I have found that this is basically true, but the picture is far more complicated. For lower numbered harmonics, it may be possible to discern the fundamental in this situation, but it certainly doesn't work when you have high harmonics such as 17, 18, and 19. When a nondescript collection of harmonics includes the fundamental, that will often be heard as the pitch. All these ideas can be tested and will become clear in the examples that follow. The following examples are presented in order to clarify the problem of hearing the fundamental as the pitch of a discrete collection of overtones. When the listener is presented with a collection of harmonic partials at equal amplitudes, it is usually easy to discern the fundamental. On the other hand, with most instrumental or vocal tones, it is very difficult ever even to hear an individual overtone. This group of examples all consist of the pitch C2, 65.41 Hz, with different sets of harmonic partials. Each tone lasts 2 seconds. For all of these examples, I urge you to listen to them repeatedly in order to clarify the points I'm making about them. You may even have other ideas about them which I have not anticipated. Example 1 presents a tone with the first 8 partials at equal amplitudes. This is similar to a tone that would be produced by a musical instrument, and the fundamental is again discernible. Example 2 presents 5 partials, the fundamental and partials 5 to 8. Again, the fundamental is clear, although the timbral focus is shifted higher. Example 3 presents 5 consecutive partials, 4 to 8, but with no energy at the first 3. Again, the fundamental is discernible, but the absence of lower partials is clear. The sound is very much like the dominant 7th chord that is formed by these partials. Example 4 presents the same 5 frequencies of example 3, but this time with their equal tempered equivalents. The sense of the dominant 7th chord is more obvious than the previous example, and the beating heard is a result of the intonation differences between these frequencies. Example 5 presents just 3 consecutive partials, 5, 6, and 7. The fundamental can still be heard, confirming Milton Babbitt's idea that you need 3 consecutive partials to hear the fundamental. Example 6 again presents 3 partials, but not consecutive, 5, 8, and 9. Now we do not hear a clear fundamental, and this is more like a higher cluster. Example 7 presents 5 partials, 1, 3, 7, 8, and 9, thus including the fundamental and 3 consecutive higher partials. We hear the fundamental, but the spectral energy is centered higher. Example 8 presents 3 consecutive partials, 11, 12, and 13. Here we do not clearly hear the fundamental, which testifies to the idea that 3 consecutive partials does not work when the partials get too high. Example 9 presents 4 partials, 3, 7, 8, and 9, including 3 consecutive partials but not the fundamental. The pitch is clear though. Example 10 presents 5 odd-numbered partials, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11. You can discern the pitch, but the spectral energy is higher. Example 11 presents 5 partials, 6, 8, 9, 11, and 13, but only 8 and 9 are consecutive. This is starting to resemble a high cluster, and the pitch is not clear. Example 12 presents 6 partials, 7, 9, 11, 14, 17, and 19. This is a cluster without a sense of pitch. Example 13 presents 7 partials, 1, 7, 11, 13, 19, 23, and 27. While this is more exaggerated than the previous example, the presence of the fundamental does anchor the pitch. Most of these tones would never be heard in any kind of music. In all these examples, the tones were stated as an unvarying timbre, and it was hard to discern the individual partials. When we fade the partials in and out, we can hear the pitches of the partials much more clearly, and the idea of overtone melodies begins to take shape. While the overtones of a note are not the same as tempered pitches, when they are presented individually, they can be heard as notes in a melody or harmony. This leads to the surprising phenomenon that a single tone can both state a melody and a harmony. Conceptually, this means that melody and harmony in a musical passage can exist on several different levels, in the fundamentals, in the harmonies between different pitches, and in the overtones. Of course, this can only happen in contexts where these aspects can be brought out through careful control of the amplitudes of individual overtones. In the following examples, the partials are faded in individually, and the steady state of their envelopes is 1/4 of the duration. All of these examples present instances of timbre changes, although these are unlike any that would be heard with acoustic instruments. There are numerous ways to create harmonies with natural overtones. The major triad, dominant 7th chord, and dominant 9th chord can all be formed from the first 9 partials. Other trichords include the minor triad, 10, 12, 15, diminished triad, partials 5, 6, 7, 0, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 0, 2, 4, 7, 8, 9, or 8, 9, 10, and so forth. But if we want to form a more complete set of chords starting from the fundamental, we need to start with the 16th partial. This means that we will obtain the richest timbres on low notes, as the 16th partial is 4 octaves above the fundamental, and that will put them into a comfortable hearing range. The notes of the chromatic scale above the fundamental are shown in Table 2. To recapitulate, they exist in these partials: 0, 16, 1, 17, 2, 18, 4, 20, 5, 21, 6, 23, 7, 24, 8, 26, 9, 27, 10, 28, and 11, 15, or 30. Of these, the tritone 6th and the minor 6th 8 are the most out of tune, 28% and 41% sharp. But if we hear them individually, these can be accepted as representations of these notes. We can also hear that they are out of tune, but if we were to correct the tuning, then the partials would not coalesce into the fundamental, which is the most important characteristic of harmonic partials. The following examples demonstrate both overtone melodies and harmonies. Several of these, chromatic steps 1, 3, 5, 6, 8, and 9, only exist above the 16th partial, so that if we want to reinforce these notes, they need to be repeated. The first set of examples presents partials fading in and out in a complex envelope. The duration is 10 seconds. Example 14 plays the same partials as example 1 above, except that the partials are unfolded from the bottom to the top. The sense of pitch is clearly heard, and we hear each overtone individually. This is a classic illustration of the overtone series. Example 15 is the same as example 14, except that the partials are unfolded from the top to the bottom. Now the sense of pitch does not emerge until after the third partial enters. Example 16 illustrates the major triad stated through the partials, with the partials that belong to the chord stated from the top down. Of course, this is the chord of nature to which more of the harmonic partials belong than any other harmony. Example 17 illustrates the harmonies 0, 2, 5 through the series 16, 18, 21, 8, 9, 21, 4, 2, 1. The first 3 state the harmony and the rest are octave duplications. 21 is repeated in order to shore up the fourth, interval 5. Harmonies indicated in this notation simply indicate the chromatic intervals above the first note, which is 0. Example 18 is a more complex illustration of the same 0-2-5 harmony. It begins with the same partials as above, but then adds the transposition of the harmony up a semitone through partials 17, 19, 22, 24, 11, 12, 6, and 3. The sense of harmony is certainly more complicated here because the complete series states 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, a hexachord, but it is clear that we hear these individual partials as notes of a melody. Example 19 illustrates the tetrachordal harmony 0, 1, 3, 7. The partials are 16, 17, 19, 24, 8, 12, 19, 4, 6, 2, 3, and 1. 17 and 19 being repeated to emphasize the minor second and minor third. The sense of that harmony is present throughout this tone. Example 20 illustrates a pentachordal harmony 0, 1, 4, 7, 9. The partials are 16, 17, 20, 24, 27, 8, 10, 12, 17, 27, 4, 5, 6, 2, 3, and 1. 17, 24, and 27 are repeated to bring in the minor second and the major sixth, but the sense of harmony is still complicated. In all of these examples except 18, the fundamental is not stated until the last element, but the sense of pitch is present throughout the tones. The next examples are somewhat difficult to discern because everything is constantly fading in and out. When partials are attacked individually, their pitches are much clearer. In this case, it is the perception of the fundamental that is more likely to be thrown into question. The next series of examples presents the same components as the previous 7, but attacked individually. The durations are 5 seconds, half those of the previous group. Example 21 plays partials 1 to 8 from the bottom up. The fundamental is heard right at the beginning, and we also hear each of the overtones individually. Example 22 plays the same partials from the top down. Here the fundamental does not begin to emerge until near the end of the tone, although the series gives a pretty good idea of where it's going. Example 23 illustrates the major triad from the top down. Again, the fundamental does not emerge until about 3/4 of the way through the tone. Example 24 illustrates the harmony 0 to 5, but without the 21st partial being repeated. The sense of harmony is present at the beginning, but the rest of the tone is devoted to allowing the fundamental to be heard. Example 25 simply repeats the series of the previous example, but double the speed. The repetition and faster speed seem to reinforce the harmony somewhat. Example 26 illustrates the harmony 0 to 5 with the transposition up a semitone, as in example 18. The harmony is clear at the beginning of the tone, and the transposition is clearer when that begins, but the overall picture is more melodic than harmonic. The fundamental appears in the middle and fades out by the end of the tone. Example 27 illustrates the tetrachord 0137, but without repeating partials that we had in example 18. The notes at the beginning of the harmony are clear at the beginning of the tone, while the rest reinforces the emergence of the fundamental, which only emerges near the end. This is more of a melodic statement of the harmony. Example 28 illustrates the pentachord 01479 with the same partial duplications as in example 19. Like example 25, the sense of the notes of the chord is present, but is more of a melodic than a harmonic statement. The previous examples have all illustrated interesting things that one can do with overtones. The next examples are all from compositions I have written using these ideas. The first come from Harmonic Fantasy number 3, which is on YouTube at the address shown on the screen. Example 29 presents a single note, E-flat 2, 6.03, with overtones that state the melody and harmony 035. You hear the first 3 notes stating this melody above the fundamental, and the fundamental doesn't emerge until nearly the end of the sound. Since the octave duplications of the fundamental are all stated in a descending manner, it is clear that they are heading towards E-flat 2. This example uses only 7 harmonics. Example 30 states F2 6.05 with overtones that state the melody in harmony 0457. This example uses 13 harmonics. Example 31 illustrates A0, 4.09, the lowest note on the piano, with overtones that state the pentachord 01358. The harmony is more complex, but the melodic notes clearly come out first and the fundamental doesn't emerge until near the end. This example also uses 13 harmonics. Example 32 illustrates D2, 6.02, with individually attacked overtones in the harmony 0247. It uses 14 harmonics, and the fundamental doesn't clearly emerge until near the end of the tone. Example 33 illustrates an E-flat 2, 6.03, with individually attacked overtones in the harmony 013. However, after the first 7 partials state 013, the next 8 state T4 of that harmony, resulting in a single tone that states 2 harmonies. The fundamental emerges quite early but seems to drop out in the middle. Example 34 illustrates F1, 5.05, with the harmony 01346, but with 24 overtones stated. The fundamental is present nearly throughout, and the overtones create more of an impression of a changing timbre. The next 4 examples are from my composition Emergence, which is based on the idea of how the fundamental emerges from harmonic partials. Example 35 emerges from a group of harmonics after a certain number of them have been played, but how long it sustains depends on factors such as how long the partials last and how long they overlap one another. Example 35 is the first note in E-flat 2. The note begins with the partials that state the harmony 0357, and the fundamental emerges roughly when the 13th partial appears through the tone. However, the durations of the partials are controlled so that only 8 of them overlap at a time, and since all 32 partials are stated, the fundamental drops out after about the 20th partial, leaving a dissonant cluster at the end. Example 36. The duration of the overlapping partials can create significant differences in the way the tone is perceived. Example 36 is identical to example 35, except that the overlap is increased from 8 to 14 partials. The increasing overlap causes an increase in the speed at which partials enter. The harmonic sequence is unfolded by the time the 13th partial enters. We continue to hear new partials enter, but the fundamental persists longer. As new partials enter, it sounds as both a change of harmony and a change of timbre. Example 37. The next note presents 5 cycles of a low B1, 5.11, with an overlapping factor of 12. The harmony stated is 01468. You clearly hear the individual tones entering, but the fundamental enters in the middle of the cycle and lasts for about half of the duration. The cyclic process means that it repeats continuously. However, we also hear the process as a timbre-changing event. Example 38. A striking illustration of spectral merging occurs in my improvisation number 2, which is available on YouTube. This work is based on the overtones of chords, which are all controlled individually. At about 6 minutes and 30 seconds into the piece, a group of tones that have been undergoing long glissandos suddenly converge on the overtones of A3, resulting in the sudden emergence of that pitch, after which they continue on to different destinations. This clearly illustrates the spectral merging process. I encourage you to listen to these examples repeatedly until you are sure you can discern the properties I've been describing. Now I will put all of this together into a composition. My Harmonic Fantasy number 5 was written with many of these ideas in mind. In this work, only the overtones that support the harmony of the immediate context are used. Some tones use as few as 4 overtones, and the maximum that any one tone uses is 16. This means that sometimes the fundamental is heard only briefly or not at all in some passages, and one of the main characteristics of the piece is discerning the emergence of the fundamentals from the overtones. This pitch span of the composition is 5 octaves, from A0, the lowest note on the piano, 4.09 in 8VE.PC, to G5, 9.08. This puts the overtones above the 16th, which are 4 octaves above the fundamental, in a comfortable hearing range. There is a heavy concentration of low notes in the piece. There are 13 sections in the piece, each lasting about 34.3 seconds. Each section uses a different number of notes, octaves, and partials. Table 3 is a diagram of the piece showing each of these qualities. There are 2 instruments, designated F for fading and A for attacking. The instruments play a specified number of partials, each of which has unique attack time within the note and which is staged for a quarter of the note's duration. The fading instrument fades in the partial and then fades it out after the duration expires, whereas the attacking instrument plays the partial at its designated time and then fades it out. The octave column shows the octave where the notes take place, using the octave point pitch class system described above. The octaves usually start in the minor third below the C, that is the lowest note in the octave, so that the lowest octave stretches from 4.09, the lowest note on the piano, to 5.08, but most of the notes are in octave 5. The lowest partial column shows what it states. The first 3 sections use only partials above the 8th, 3 octaves above the fundamental, and sections 4 to 5 only go down to the 4th partial. In these sections, the music is entirely in the partials. The fundamentals are not always clear in sections 1 to 3, but they begin to emerge in sections 4 to 6 and are clear for the rest of the piece. Strong timbre changes are heard near the end. The piece opens and closes with the fading instrument using the attacking instrument in the middle. The 7th and 10th sections are transitions where both instruments are used. In the 9th section, the partials are attacked twice as fast. Climaxes occur during the transitions when both instruments and the largest number of notes are used. The work lasts for 7 minutes and 35 seconds. I hope that these examples in the composition show you some of the powerful ways that overtones can be used in electroacoustic music.